All right, thank you, Hessa. And hello, everybody. My name is Kofi Boone. I teach landscape architecture at NC State University and part of the Uplift team. I'm going to share my slides. All right, so this is a webinar about placekeeping. It's the second part to a two-parter. The first part about placemaking, and this is about strategies for stewarding community spaces. As a reminder to people who aren't familiar with Uplift, the goal of Uplift is to support tourism through community-driven efforts in rural North Carolina. Uplift works regionally across county borders to support local tourism leaders and practitioners in realizing their vision for tourism in their community, including natural, recreational, cultural, agricultural, culinary, built, and other tourism. So this is the result of about 3 years of work. And as another reminder, the Uplift Rural Tourism Summit is coming up. That's November 14th. So if you ask that you RSVP, you can go to the Uplift website to get more information about that. Today's webinar is about placekeeping. And by the end, we hope that you learn about the origins of placekeeping and how it's different from placemaking. It's complementary, but it's not the same thing. We hope that you increase your awareness of examples and case studies that illustrate a range of approaches. And we hope that you build your understanding of principles and strategies designed to sustain it in communities like yours. First, we need to talk about placemaking. These are two really important resources for anyone interested in the topic of placemaking. The one on the left, William White, Holly White's book, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, was written in the 1960s and was really a critique of how we design a lot of public spaces. In some cases, we were designing public life out of them. His focus was urban. The study was done in New York City, but some of those principles extend way beyond the urban context and even across the United States. Holly White's research led to the development of an organization called Project for Public Spaces, which still exists today and is a major resource for anyone interested in the topic of placemaking. At the center of placemaking, as you can see in the diagram, is place, but the physical place enables all kinds of activities that we use to maintain our social relations, our cultural ties, our economic vitality, our environmental stewardship. So you can see rings radiating from the center, which is place, and then further rings that radiate beyond those that influence place. And this model and this approach to placemaking is how can places be transformed to enable these activities to occur? And it doesn't always have to be high design, expensive work. As a case for placemaking, this is Bridgman Courtyard in Bridgman, Michigan. This project started as residents' observations of a parking lot that was underutilized in a town of about 10,000 people in Michigan. That's Julie Stratting there, who's led this effort. And you can see sort of the beginnings of the end result, but it didn't start like this in terms of laying foundations in concrete. It started more like this, with an idea of how to activate that parking lot to create a social place, a place where people could build community relations and build community cohesion. A simple trellis structure, some painting, some movable furniture, some low-cost, high-impact elements. And it started as a GoFundMe campaign, as you can see here. And so with these documents, they were able to raise over $50,000. They also got assistance from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is a part of the state government, and resulted in iterative stages, the revitalization of this particular place for gathering. And so in this picture, you can see some of the hallmarks of placemaking. Again, low cost, high impact tools that are designed to maximize sociability. So you can see high school kids, they're painting the patterns that are on the ground. You can see the movable tables and chairs, the umbrellas. You know, a lot of these things now are very common when you ever see placemaking. And successful. You know, it is a place that was embraced by that particular community, and is a place for community events, gatherings, dinners, fundraisers, performances, and a lot of different things. I thought about that in contrast to a place that I visited maybe 10 years ago. This is the Gorilla Garden in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans. And the Gorilla Garden is right on the edge of the lower Ninth Ward and industrial land, leading up to the Mississippi River, and is one of the few places in the lower Ninth Ward that produces produce, fresh produce for residents of that particular community. This was at a meeting of the American Society of Landscape Architects. So most of the people in this picture are landscape architects. It was started by an organization called Backyard Gardeners. That's Jenga Mwendo there, who was in the first picture, who was giving us a tour. And in this case, it was the same tools, you know, the the low cost, high impact elements, the structure. There were partnerships with universities to incrementally build this out. It's stewarded and owned by the local community, but its goal is different. So rather than spark economic vitality, it's filling a need of the knowledge keepers of this neighborhood, the people who are really important to the history of the Lower Ninth Ward, to allow them to build community, but also improve public health. And so it's a fine line between the two, but what's centered in placemaking is what's enabled through the place. What's centered in placekeeping, we'll get to, is something a little bit different. And that's livelihood. So all of the elements that maintain the life of the knowledge keepers in the community. And it does overlap with a lot of these, but it offers a different lens and asks different questions when you start to think about what comfort in image is, what access and linkages are, what sociability is, and what uses and activities are. Place is important, place matters, that's why it's in the name, but the keeping part is keeping the livelihoods of the people that that place is sustaining, and it alters how we see cases moving forward. So in simple bullets, placekeeping is about a lot of different things. We'll start with number 2 first, that every town and every community has a history, has culture, has local traditions. And so how are we thinking about this as a process to actively protect those and amplify them for the benefit of continuing those traditions? The benefits are community centered. So the idea of who profits and who benefits from this work is a critical conversation. And as much as is able, we want to steer those to the knowledge keepers of the community, the people that hold the stories that give the place value. Every community wants to maintain authenticity. Nobody wants to be a carbon copy of another community. They want to celebrate their uniqueness. So that's definitely a factor. But we'll come back to number 1, which is the other impact of placemaking, is that once we start to activate a place through activity, through investment, through programming, it invariably has an impact on everything around it, an economic impact. And in some cases, it can be an economic impact that displaces the people who are most vulnerable, or tragically in some cases, the actual knowledge keepers themselves aren't able to patronize, support, or live anywhere near the places they make. So these are aspirational in terms of how to think about placemaking or placekeeping as different from placemaking, centering livelihoods, knowing that place enables it, but always placing a priority on the people that keep the stories. And we'll go through a few examples that might illustrate this a little more clearly for folks. This first one is in Durham, where I live. And this is Catawba Trail Farm, which is run by Urban Community Agronomics. And of course, food, ubiquitous, no matter where you go, everybody's trying to celebrate food. It's almost sort of becoming sort of that typical element. But there are elements tied to this that make it a bit different, that make it unique and tie it to the notion of placekeeping. First is their setting. So Catawba Trail Farm is north of Durham. It's in the county. It's along the Little River. It was formerly part of the Snow Hill 4 plantation, which was the plantation that produced the wealth that led to the establishment of Stagville Plantation, which was the largest in the Cameron lands, the largest plantation in our region. So it has sort of a layered history. It was on the Catawba Trail that crossed the state. So it also has indigenous roots. At the time that the farm was formed, it was formed on land that was owned by the Triangle Land Conservancy. So it had high conservation value due to its proximity to the Little River. But because of its cultural legacy and history, the UCAN leaders and their board, some of whom are descendants of enslaved African people that used to work this land, started to think about how to transform this land into a place to teach that cultural heritage, but teach those connections to the land. And so there's very unique history that's tied to this specific place that can't really be replicated elsewhere. They started with clearing part of the area that had been somewhat overgrown to community garden beds. And so they maintain about 42 of these now. They lease them out and they become sort of a revenue stream that helps to support some of their other programming. And you can see people here working in those community garden beds. Through their work, they were able to uncover unmarked burial sites and graves. This is the burial site to the family that owned this particular plantation and enslaved the African people that worked the site. Right adjacent to it, though, through some really significant research, Duke University, they found evidence of unmarked burial sites that we believe are formerly enslaved African people on the site as well. And so what you see here is sort of a celebration to commemorate and connect to those ancestors, walking distance literally from the productive landscapes that you saw. And so again, this is something that's very specific to this particular site, these living descendants. This is them communing with their ancestors on site. As they were working and moving with their board, they were so ambitious and wanted to do so many different things. They asked for some technical support to help with site planning and some design issues as they started to grow and amplify their work. And so this is a workshop that they had where they're using tools to start to visualize how the different various elements that they're promoting fit together to illustrate their preferences in terms of how they want them to look, to make sure that they're authentic to the spirit of the group, prioritizing, deciding what needs to happen first, needs to happen later. Again, all in the context of ancestral land, uh, indigenous land, conservation value, heritage value, food security value. There were a lot of different values that were competing, but were all very important for this organization. And their outcomes have been pretty significant coming out of that process of sort of getting their vision together to hold on to the place and then kind of invest in the elements that make it unique. Although in Durham, it is a farm site, and so we are talking about rural communities across North Carolina, but these settings, providing settings where people can gather for events, can gather, host events, can have other elements happen without compromising the integrity of the site. That's what this image sort of illustrates. Some of their new development that came out of their vision plan, a new market stand to really formalize selling produce and celebrating the fact that you're getting access to organic and locally grown food. They have an incredible wave of volunteers that come and work through the site in partnership with Urban Community Agronomics. They have started to invest in all kinds of things, including public art and other more advanced structures. And they're starting to actually kind of formalize this as a place that straddles all of these lines, but all kind of grounded and led by the people that steward it. And they're having an increasing number of people use the landscape not for the food system work and not for the cultural story, but for the environmental context of it. Again, we're just walking distance from the little river. And due to their hard work in developing this vision plan, they've been successful in the land transfer. So this is an example of a land back movement, in which case the land that was once held by the Triangle Land Conservancy now has been given to Urban Community Agronomics, to the descendants of people that were once enslaved. They now own this land, and now they're able to continue sort of the keeping tradition. On the arts and cultural side, I recently, again, was in New Orleans. It's one of my favorite places. And, just with the caveat that we know that New Orleans, that tourism and visitorship is a critical part of their economy. And so there's infrastructure there that a lot of smaller rural communities in North Carolina don't have. But it's not uniformly distributed across the city. And so this is a part of the city that does not, get the press and get the attention and get the resources that the places you may know of in New Orleans do. So this is Bywater, and this is Studio B, which was started by Brandon Beamock. Uh, uh, his last name is escaping me right now, but a local resident, young man who was an artist, and due to low property values and other things, happened across this warehouse and decided to transform this warehouse into a gallery, performance venue, a place to sort of amplify local artists and kind of continue that tradition, people who were really born and bred in this particular part of New Orleans. That warehouse is about 30,000 square feet. And when he got it, it was completely empty and vacant. So if you are in a community that has warehouses, industrial infrastructure that needs utility, there are opportunities to collaborate and work with artists, particularly local artists that are interested in sustaining the local traditions that are based there. When you go into the warehouse, it's organized into a series of outdoor galleries with massive artwork. A lot of it is very specific to issues facing New Orleans. So there's work there about, you know, changes in the school system, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, celebrating local figures that are there. But it's also a meeting venue and a performance venue for young artists. So they're trying to use it to enable young artists to also continue that tradition. Everything from doing large mural art like B Mike does, but also filmmaking and other entities. So it's a massive kind of effort that's really spearheaded by one creative artist. In our own backyard, not far away from where I live, is Wallace Simpson Whirligig Park in Wilson, North Carolina. I had a chance to meet Mr. Simpson before he passed away and go to quote unquote acid park. He was a World War II veteran who applied what he learned in terms of mechanical work to create whirligigs, air driven machines that kind of moved on their own. And when I went out there, the only way to really see it was, at night because he put reflective tape on all these things. And people would literally sit outside of his yard and turn on their headlights and see these things moving at night. That was the most popular thing at that time. But he was advanced in age, and these objects were going into decay, and they were unique. He was one of one in terms of doing this particular kind of work. So through a series of partnerships, going all the way up to the National Endowment of the Arts, there was a proposal to generate a park where one hadn't existed in an industrial part of Wilson that would sort of celebrate, this really specific artist's legacy, but also engage in the restoration of these and to use the restoration of those as an opportunity to build capacity and expand the knowledge on how that works. The story of the restoration is actually very interesting, and I think the production of art is one thing, but the long-term stewardship of it, the care of it, the restoration where it's concerned, is also important and ties to STEM education, ties to engineering, ties to a lot of fields. So they were very upfront and very public about how that worked. It was restored, near the actual site of the park, so people could go in and visit and talk to folks. It was tied to college programs, high school programs, other programs, and so they used a very local form of art and a very unique artist to catalyze all of these other elements and really build another center in Wilson. One thing I did like about it was the ability to see, the old versions of them, the unrestored ones, compared to the restoration ones, and the clarity of the story of how that occurred. There was a economic impact report done in 2020 about the park, which at that point had been open for several years. And what's interesting about it is, in terms of activity, it led to a very dramatic increase in visitorship, particularly day trips to Wilson to experience this, and then enabled other sort of secondary and supportive activities from food and beverage to other forms of tourism for people who are visiting there. But as of 2018 and 2018 dollars, almost $1 million a year in terms of value and activity. And you can see 68% of that tied to tourism. And the other part is, although it led to dramatic property value increases immediately adjacent to the Whirligig Park, overall has not had a significant impact on the town of Wilson based on their analysis. So with regards to arts and culture and placekeeping, how stewardship can be celebrated, elevated, and distributed to local people as a part of that process, the process of reclaiming and making art is something that we have great examples of in our own state. The Texas Freedom Colonies project in Texas leads us in a different direction in terms of placekeeping, led by the brilliant Dr. Andrea Roberts, who is now at University of Virginia. But the Texas Freedom Colonies, for people who don't know, are towns that were formed by free Black Americans right at the start of Reconstruction. So for some Black folks in the South, they went west to get land, to build towns, to build relationships. So the Freedom Colonies are their collective name, and there are many, many across the state, but they are at risk or under threat for various reasons, often development, because Texas is a fast growing state. So suburban development sometimes encroaches on the vitality of these small towns. Some of the work is really intensive. And so this is a part of placekeeping as well, in terms of building relationships and building connections to technical expertise to begin to build a database and a knowledge base of why this place is unique and why it matters. The anecdotes and the stories matter. So storytelling is at the core and at the narrative, but it's often stronger when it's supported by evidence that you can gather. And so partnerships with Texas A&M and other universities to do scanning of historic and archival and archaeological sites, photo documentation of buildings. It was all a pretty intensive process for the Freedom Colonies, and mapping, including some crowdsourced mapping in terms of inviting others to map them. And you can see with the dots the number, right, of Freedom Colonies that have been documented. And the uh, the project has served as sort of a way to network these communities. In some cases, they have low levels of resources, they have low capacity, but when they come together and start to network and build collectively, they can have more influence and more power. In this case, we see the dedication of a protected and restored historic district and an historic marker at one of these places. And so uh, several weeks ago, we gave a webinar about Rosenwald schools, and this is an aspiration for a number of us in the state of North Carolina to treat Rosenwald schools in the same manner, with markers and with recognition and with resources for restore. In this case, it was a grassroots ground up one that built from an evidence base and a relationship base with the intent of keeping the memory of these freedom colonies alive and then formalized, as you can see, with markers and with resources for restoration. There are many communities we could pick in North Carolina that have a similar story, but we'll talk briefly about Princeville in Edgecombe County. For people who don't know, it started as Freedom Hill in 1865 and is considered to be one of the first communities founded by free African Americans in the United States. Later renamed Princeville in 1885 after Turner Prince, who was a local carpenter but was very influential community leader and someone who built many of the homes of the old age of Princeville. The challenge of Princeville is it's in the floodplain of the Tar River, therefore is at risk of major flooding. And actually, when we got connected with them, it was in the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew in 2016. To talk about placekeeping and storytelling, not as a margin or tangential, but as more central, the one of the things that we tried to talk about regarding placekeeping is that not many people know this story. And so keeping that story alive and passing it to the next generation is very important. And so these are two images that reflect tours that were organized with young people coming from the Triangle region, an hour east, hour and a half east to get to Princeville to learn a story. And so young Princeville residents led these tours. They started on the left at the bend in the Tar River. That's also the place where the flooding initiated in the town, but it also was the furthest navigable point on the Tar River coming south from Virginia for boats carrying enslaved African people. So essentially, where they were looking on the left is where those boats stopped. Enslaved African people were transferred to smaller boats and were marched to Tarboro, to the town of Common, to be sold. So they chose, the Princeville folks chose that as the beginning of their story and then took them through town. On the right is an historic church that is tied to the origins of the town. It's one of the few remaining structures from that period of significance. And so the ability to tour that and see that made some of this history real for folks and created some impetus to why people wanted to hold on to it and celebrate it. And the image on the left is the Museum and Welcome Center, which at the time of this picture was damaged and not accessible due to damage from Hurricane Matthew. On the right is a short-term high impact use to try and keep that story alive, a place to enable those stories to be told, a mobile museum, which actually came out of engagement with young people in this particular process. And that mobile museum is actually right in the same place as the real museum as the museum continues to be renovated. And so in some cases with placekeeping, it's about, small steps. So in this case, there are broader risks and broader issues associated with Princeville, but incremental small things that can keep the story going, amplify it, share it with others, stands as an example. And most recently, this is about a week ago, this is the Princeville Homecoming, which they've initiated since Hurricane Matthew, led by Freedom.org. And so Freedom.org's executive director is on the left, Marquetta Dickens. And so around 300 people showed up, and it was a chance to kind of join together in solidarity and talk about stories, tell, other things that build those relational ties. So that's an example in our own backyard of many communities that, small towns that are at risk that have unique stories and the things that are available to you even before you get to major capital expenses. We have not talked about American Indian folks and indigenous cultures, which are the bedrock, really the foundation of all of us, at least living in this country. And it's important to celebrate the stories of those folks as they have a relationship with the landscape that a lot of us don't. So placekeeping, in their terms, is very different than how we tend to think about it. But it's important to celebrate those stories. This is Phones Cliff. This is the Rappahannock River in Virginia, right across the border from where we are. At risk, you can see in some ways due to the cliff, eroding into the river, but also land that was threatened by development and other elements. In addition to it being ancestral land of the Rappahannock tribe, it was also endangered nesting ground for several birds of prey. And also grew plants. Many of my friends who are American Indian talk about plants being medicine and the world, Mother Earth, Turtle Island, that, we're all meant to be here to support and relate to one another. And so any threat that we kind of in our Western mind think of as ecological or environmental, our American Indian friends don't think of it that way. It's more relational. It impacts all of us. And we have a responsibility to properly steward these landscapes for future generations. So the cattail that Chief Ann Richardson is holding on the left of that picture is not just something for beauty or aesthetics or even for habitat or wildlife. It was used as building material by the Rappahannock tribe. It was used for all kinds of instruments and tools. It was used for medicine. And so this is an example of how placekeeping means something a little bit different, and the need for a lot of us to get better educated, more aware of this, and more supportive of these particular efforts. Through their hard work as a tribe and through partnerships with conservancies, including the Chesapeake Conservancy, they were able to successfully get the land back into ancestral hands, over 450 acres of land, including that cliff. Part of their risk wasn't just environmental, it was also archaeological, and there are parts of our state where this is true as well. Eroding banks that have burial sites in them, that have artifacts, that have all kinds of irreplaceable elements that are tied to sustaining culture. From the ecological side, specific settings where people can enact rituals, can harvest local crops, can, do different things that are very specific to the ecology of the place. And so the protection of this and the keeping of it through partnerships has enabled some recovery of that lost history. And they have gone another step further, dealing with the tribal youth program and return to the river, that there are generations now that have a separation from the connection to the land that their ancestors did. And so now that that land is under ancestral governance, they can enact that now, pass those traditions on and those rituals on to perpetuate their cultural traditions. In our own backyard, we also have examples of that. There are many tribes, federally recognized, state recognized, and other tribes as well, that are facing similar challenges. This map comes to us from work done by our friends at the Coastal Dynamics Design Lab at NC State, who've been working with the Coharie tribe for several years now, with the idea of activating the bigger concept of the Great Coharie River. So the Coharie River runs through multiple counties, but is ancestral land and is also a unique black water swamp that actually connects to one of the oldest living things in North America, a cypress tree, that you can paddle out to see if you're strong. It's a long paddle. But even along the way, you start to get a sense of the land and why it matters so much to this particular culture. And we had the benefit and the privilege of touring this through Uplift with members of the Coharie tribe, where you start at the Coharie Tribal Center. They have an excellent series of exhibits where they guide you and help you understand the cultural context first. That's a number of us standing in front of one of the oldest dugout canoes in the state that kind of came out of the river. They have an incredible story about how it surfaced, and you can tell its significance. It holds a very important part of the center. So after getting grounded and connected to the culture, then they put you in a kayak and then you paddle. And so this gives you a sense of the quality of that. And so people pointing out foodstuffs, native materials, bird species, singing and speaking in their native language. These are things that are so unique, and the setting and the context amplify that. That the imperative for keeping that and helping people learn how to steward these better becomes clear. So, a wonderful local example. We're cheering them on. So those were a few examples from different contexts and different approaches and ways of thinking about stewardship and placekeeping. Uh, the take homes are here, that placemaking would put place in the center of this diagram. Like to suggest that if you're interested in placekeeping, that you put livelihoods of the people who are the keepers of the story in the center. And you still activate the same channels, but you're looking at them from a different perspective. And if you're thinking about placekeeping in your own communities, uh, think about a few questions as you are approaching it. Organization, that's the common thread in all of these cases that we've looked at. There's something unique and special in your community. It's great. Are there a critical mass of people that feel like, they want to come together to figure out how to sustain it and how to keep it? Documentation becomes really important. So a lot of the places that we think are important are in the world of oral histories and narratives, and that's very important. But as you are starting to deal with policy and attracting resources, the more you can document them, the more effective you'll be. And so that means talking to our elders and learning about what these stories happen to be, conducting archival research, figuring out the key people and places and things and times that are important, mapping where it's appropriate, and even more advanced research where it's called for. Empowerment is something that we don't often talk about, but as a professor and what would be considered a technical expert, uh, local expertise is the partnership that's required, and the local expertise needs to lead. So it'd be very easy for a technical expert to run with information that they've gathered working with communities, but in fact, with placekeeping, it goes the other way around, where the local people have to be in the driver's seat and have to be uh, front and center at every time a decision gets made. So some of that is also pace in terms of moving at the speed of trust, which is a comment that a good friend of mine coined that I think is appropriate for this conversation as well, is making sure that when you take steps that the people who are most affected are the first in line to make those decisions. All of the placekeeping examples we talked about, they started small. You didn't see huge moonshots in terms of ideas, resources that didn't exceed the capacity and the ability of those folks to take care of them. They were incremental, they were slow. Starting small and working small means that if it doesn't work, it doesn't kill the system. If it does work, then it becomes a candidate to later on scale up and get more resources. So keeping your moves within the context of your capacity is really important. Partnerships. So once you get a few short-term wins and things seem to be rolling, how can those either intentionally seek out partnerships that can help to amplify and grow them, or put you in situations where you sort of interact with folks like that so you can build those resources. When the time is right, scaling up. And when you scale up, think about the knowledge keepers first. Who are the people that hold the stories? And how can scaling up actually help them and deal with their needs? And evaluation is always good. It's always good to talk about what worked, what didn't, what you could do better, and to set priorities along the way. Lastly, a few resources before we get into any questions. First, want to reinforce what was said earlier regarding the Uplift NC Knowledge Center. There are a lot of wonderful resources there. A lot of people zero in on the funding part first, what grants are available, what resources are available, but there are other ones that you might discover when you're there. So encourage you to go there first. And there are a number of other resources. This isn't the only time, and this isn't the only way that this topic will be discussed. So we referenced Project for Public Spaces. Of course, they started in an urban context, but when you go to their website, you'll see they've worked globally and they've worked in all contexts from rural to urban. So it's an incredible number of case studies and examples that you can use for inspiration. or for asking questions about what you can do in your own backyard. The Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage has an excellent website, and the Uplift team has a partnership with them to look into. So when you're in the Knowledge Center, you'll see resources regarding that. The Mellon Foundation Humanities in Place has been instrumental in working with communities where the specific stories that are being celebrated are rooted in a specific place and context. This is one of the philanthropies that recognizes the value of place and investing in the knowledge keepers in that place. And so their grants program is really good. And the Indigenous Design Collaborative, which is out of the Arizona State University School of Architecture. This is one of the premier centers that's led by American Indian people, tribal communities that are looking at planning and design through the lens of Indigenous knowledge. And so for people who are interested in that lens, they are a great go-to group. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.